And I will say we have had much fewer pauses so far this season, and
Well, it couldn't get worse. To be fair. Welcome to the third episode of the Monte and Wolf Show. Thank you very much for watching, and remember to follow our Twitch channel here at Last Free Nation and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get lots of great content. Last week was our first full week of League of Legends content, so now we have Power Spike going, we have Monte Wolf Show going, we have Summoning Insight, and we have Best Damn League Show, all on this channel, so please subscribe, of course, to our YouTube channel or on a podcast platform of your choice, or follow our Twitch channel to watch us live on Twitch. All of those shows are also live, and we're live right now, unless you're watching the VOD, in which case we were live in the past. Joining me is Wolf. By the way, Wolf, surprise to you, we will not have a show next week because I'm watching the Super Bowl. So there you go.
Oh, that's good, because I was planning on talking to you about this after the show, but I was hoping I would be watching the Super Bowl as well next week, very early in the morning for me, and I could do the show, but it would be very difficult. So I was like, well, let's see what Monty's take on this is. Well, we'll take a week off.
My take is I will celebrate the largest day in American sports, and I'm sure Andrew, our producer, would like to do that as well, and you would like to do it, and I would like to do it. So it's an American holiday, and that means we will not be having a show. So we will push back that show. Fortunately, this coming week there are not too many bangers that we will be missing. Maybe KT Gen.G or Hanwha Life versus Dplus. Those are probably the highlight matches of the next KT Dplus. Okay, so there are a few games. So sorry about that. KT will probably lose all of them, and there will be nothing to talk about in reality.
Yeah, definitely. I think KT versus Gen.G over the last few years has always just accidentally been a banger series for some reason. It seems like these two teams always go to like 40-minute games against each other. It always goes to game 3 and Gen.G wins in the end. Seems like that's kind of a common theme for them. We'll see how that one goes. We have to talk about the BRION debacle that happened yesterday.
Wolf's really into this. Okay, guys, so I'm sorry. I know that after last week's show, we were like, wow, Dplus and T1, definitely the top two teams. They're cut above. Yeah, we can't get into, Gen.G 2-0ing Dplus and actually just like spanking their butt cheeks red. We can't get into Hanwha Life upsetting T1 and kind of thrusting the entire world of the LCK and our power rankings out of order. We've got to talk about the horrible refereeing, which unfortunately has been a touch point of the LCK for the last couple of years. So go. Explain, Wolf, what happened.
So let's talk about this for a minute, because I think this is something that a lot of people are really worried about right now. A lot of people are concerned about, and LCK made a statement and people aren't happy with how that went. So we'll start from the beginning. So in order to give your side selection in the LCK, you notify an LCK referee, and this could be done like up to 3 days before the match. I think it can be like at the latest about like maybe 24 hours before the game has to be done, but you're kind of encouraged to do it early so teams can prepare and stuff like that. And so you can also like know that it's confirmed, etc. and whatnot. So the referee was told about the side selection versus Bro and KT, and they gave the wrong information. So KT has side selection, so KT chooses blue side, I believe in this case, gives Bro that information. The referee gives the wrong information and says that they've actually chosen red side, and then BRION prepares for the match with that in mind, and then finds out 40 minutes before the match that the side is actually the opposite, right? So BRION was very upset, and we were told about this on our show like right before we went live. We got the update like, hey, like this is going on. We're probably not going to acknowledge it on the show right now, unless it becomes a big issue. And BRION was very upset because they prepared, right? And I've never seen the coaching staff of BRION look as upset as they looked after that series. But in typical BRION fashion, like basically LCK said, there's nothing we can do about this right now. This is a misunderstanding. We've messed up. What are we going to do? Like the show has to go on. And I think a lot of teams would have just said, no, it doesn't have to go on, and you have to fix this. But
you have to reschedule the match, which, by the way, there is plenty of time for. I'm just going to put that out there. There is plenty of time for.
And we can get into some of the finer points of that. I just want to get the timeline out. So Giga Chad BRION though said, "No, we'll play. We're cool." And so I think a lot of other teams might not have done that. I think a lot of other teams in a critical matchup, even BRION might not have done that. If this matchup decided whether they went to playoffs or something like that, they might have said, "No, I have the right to say no." And I don't know what would happen in that case. LCK would have had to deal with that whole debacle. But BRION did, Giga Chad, say, "We're making a statement about this, but yeah, let's play the game." And then they did, and they played on both sides. And ultimately, it didn't matter for the result of the game, in my opinion. But that's not, and a lot of people have said that, they're like, well, they had to play on both sides anyways. But that's like kind of like saying like, it's okay if like my crazy uncle drunk drives because he always gets home safe and nobody gets hurt.
Exactly.
It's like, well, I mean, that's
it just
the way to think about this issue.
Time. Doesn't matter. Just to mean that it's not going to matter next time. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the timeline, right? And then afterwards, LCK made a statement after the series. BRION made one like instantly in game one. This is what happened. It was translated by Ashley Kang, Kevin Kim. Then LCK made their statement on Instagram in Korean, and it was then later translated by the LCK global team into English. And the statement basically said, "We messed up. This is really bad. We're reviewing our policies to make sure this doesn't happen again." There was no like compensation given to BRION or anything like that. LCK didn't like fine themselves and give BRION money or anything like that. As far as I know, there is no rule right now in the LCK where a team could fine the LCK, for example, because a lot of people are asking like they got to get paid or something. I don't think there is a rule in place, but maybe because of issues like this, teams may try to negotiate that for next year so that if a referee error like this occurs and the game has to go on, perhaps some compensation of some type is given to BRION. But at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a rule like that in place. So that's the timeline.
Yeah. And I think what's so, interesting about this is that because it was the last match of the week, it would cost more money to have people come in when the days are dark, right? It would cost money to have the crew come in. It would cost money to have you and the other casters come in. But because there are not LCK matches on Mondays and Tuesdays, and this is the last match of the week, in theory, this match could have been played on a Monday or Tuesday. Am I going crazy here?
Well, so during a lot of the year, there are Wild Rift games on Monday and Tuesday that happen in the same studio with in the past I don't think they had live audiences. I think they might eventually have them now. I'm going to be totally honest, I don't follow the Wild Rift scene at all. I did it a little bit over the last 2 years, like just occasionally see who's winning, what's going on. I know that in the past Wild Rift has been played on Mondays and Tuesdays in the LCK. And some of these referees, by the way, work 5 days a week at the LCK and then go and do challengers work and are doing some of the stuff with challengers. Now, here's my proposed solution so that this doesn't ever happen again. I'll say this first before we like give our takes on, maybe should BRION get compensation, whatever. I think the best way to make sure this doesn't happen in the future ever is either make a group chat with 2 representatives from the team, and when the side selection is done, have one person from the team who's not doing side selection, BRION in this case, say, "I acknowledge this side selection with both representatives of the team present." Alternatively, you could do a 30-second phone call where you call one representative, you call the other one, you're in a 3-way call, so there's a Riot referee representative, and then both teams are there, and then boom, like one person says, "I pick blue," all 3 parties are present. You could just say, "I acknowledge you've chosen blue side." It's recorded, so then there's like no controversy here. Both teams are present. Because how it's done now is one team submits the side to Riot, and then Riot puts it into a Google document that's shared with all the teams. And so like one team will have access to that particular Google document. Not all teams have access to this, obviously. And then that team could then see, okay, it's in the document that they chose blue side, which is how this actually happened. To my understanding, is the wrong side was written in the Google document, and that's all BRION had access to. I don't think BRION actually talked with anyone specifically.
I mean, I can tell you how they resolve this in another esports title. So, for example, in Counter-Strike, when you're doing map selections, right? Because teams have an opportunity to, depending on whether you're playing a best of 1 or a best of 3, it's a little bit different, right? Because you get to ban more maps, obviously, in a best of 1 out of the pool of 7. But what happens is all of the team representatives, so coaches and managers, are in a Discord server, and the players as well, right? For the tournament operator. And then every time a match comes up, there's a new channel that is made just for that match. And who's in there are the 2 teams and the tournament admins. And then they go back and forth banning and picking maps. So there's a record between the 2 teams. Each team has 1 representative responsible for doing this. And you could easily create a Discord match thread for every single LCK game and just have the teams put their selections in that thread.
There may be something like this in place, but to my knowledge, there's not. And that it is just simply one team is given the information, giving the information to Riot, and then they're posting it into a Google document. So the Riot referees kind of have full control over that information, and then they distribute it through the Google document, which again is given specific access to that team. And it's supposed to be a convenient way to where at any point in time, whether your Kakao Talk is working, Kakao Talk WhatsApp in Korea, basically. Whether your Kakao Talk is working or not or whatever, you should always be able to access that document and see the information. And then you have all sorts of information from Riot for all your matches for the week, and everything for that team is specifically put into this really well-organized document, so you have all the data, all the info, coaches can access that. But I think having the ability to either have a record chat, like whether it's on Discord, whether it's on Kakao Talk, WhatsApp, whatever, a recorded chat where that's there and the other team acknowledges it, saying like, I have seen this, and it's like not official until the other team says, I acknowledge that you've chosen blue side, for example, so that they can't later say like, oh, well, I didn't get that message or it didn't go through or whatever. Having them have to say, I acknowledge this. And if they don't acknowledge it in the chat, then a call is made, right? And then it's on the phone and like that call is recorded and you say like, okay, I've chosen the blue side. The other team says, I acknowledge this. The referee's the third party here and says, okay. And that's how it goes. Because the way this happened now is just like referee error, right? And a lot of people are calling for the referee's head and like this person needs to be punished. And like in some ways, like I don't think in my opinion, I don't think the individual referee should be punished except by Riot. Like this is not something where like BRION or the LCK needs to like fire this referee or whatever, but Riot needs to take action for this mistake internally. I don't think we need to like Riot needs to announce like we fired the guy, like you're welcome. I don't think that needs to happen here personally, but I do think that teams need to argue for rules to be in place to where, for example, the LCK could be fined by a team if something like this, some sort of error like this happens, because delaying the show and pushing it to Monday, Tuesday, which again is theoretically possible if there's no Wild Rift. Let's just assume there's no Wild Rift this week, because I don't think there is this week in particular. You still have to, the cost of rerunning that match is insanely high, unless you then did it like online, for example, and you did it with the special rules we had in place during COVID. But then, like, if you're BRION, do you want that for your sponsors? You're playing from home, you're not getting the same sort of, exposure for your players and the sponsorships on the jerseys and stuff like that. Like, is that really what you want anyways, is BRION? It's a kind of sensitive and awkward issue, and teams need to be talking with each other, I think, and figuring out how they can make this right with the LCK win issues like this happen in the future, in my opinion.
For me, I guess I don't find this particular instance to be as outrageous as some of the stuff that happened last year in terms of these hour-long game delays and refs being paralyzed and unable to make decisions. But the reffing has clearly been a consistent problem within LCK, and Kespa is responsible for that, right? Are they supposed to be the ones who... I mean, so like there has to be something done in general to fix all of these ref errors that are occurring.
Yeah. We have a team of referees that I can't tell you exactly how big it is, but it's quite large, and you don't see the same refs on every match, but I think most of the refs do come to work every day, and I see them when I come to work because they're there long before I get there, and I show up several hours before the games with the other casters, and I'm there every day. They're there every day. I think they do a lot of work, and they work 5 days a week for LCK, and then of course some of them do challengers as well, like myself. Like the global casters and the refs we're on the same team, we're working all the time, right? But the team maybe needs to be more specialized, or perhaps like the person who does side selection probably shouldn't be someone who does the game refereeing. Don't know if that's true or not. I don't have that much information about the referees because they are Kespa and Riot works with them, but we don't interact. So especially on the global side, I don't know how those procedures work, but it seems like perhaps the referees are overworked. There's a lot of stress in the position, especially because you're on camera for some people. And some people would argue, well, if that's too stressful for you, if it's too much work for you, you probably shouldn't do it. But I think maybe we should have a better team or a more specialized team, because these issues have continued to plague the LCK for the last few years. And game integrity is, for me, like the number one thing always, more than whether the show looks good, is like, is the game legit? Are there problems? Are the teams playing fairly? Like, that is the most important thing. And in this case, it didn't happen 100%. Ultimately, did it affect the series that much? In my opinion, no. But I don't want any player ever to sit on stage in their chair in front of the computer going, well, this isn't what I prepared. This isn't what I wasn't. This is not what I was told. This is not what I practiced the last few days for. And have to just kind of change the plan on the fly. And for KT in their case, like, they didn't do anything wrong either, you know. And if they changed the side selection, KT would be like, well, that's not what I practiced. That's not what
Right,
we
of course.
prepared. So, you know, it's a very unfortunate situation, but I do think we need some changes maybe need to be made in terms of how, at least in particular, this side selection is decided. And I will say we have had much fewer pauses so far this season, and
Well, it couldn't get worse. To be fair.
and just unrelated, like, the LCK has changed their policy. You guys might not know this, but I think it was announced. But either way, I could tell you guys this was. I think the LCK is very happy to share the policies we have in place for pauses in the past were that we have to find out what's going on. Right, there's a problem, and then it has to be approved by basically like the QA team at Riot, like whether we can share the pause and the issue and what's happening, because some bugs, for example, Riot doesn't want people to know about so that people can't abuse them in solo queue games. So like sometimes there was an awkward 30-minute pause, and some of that pause delay was because the teams were deliberating about what's going to happen, but also Riot didn't know how to handle necessarily how we share that with the audience. Whereas the new policy is basically find out what's going on as soon as possible, tell the fans as soon as possible. Like, that's the new policy. It just doesn't matter what it is. Like, people need to know, fans need to know, we need to be transparent. And luckily we haven't had any big giant issues yet. And BRION made a statement instantly about this, so this was very transparent. And I think Riot was definitely okay with BRION making that statement. But in the past, like, there's been moments where, like, you know, Atlas and I or Valdez and I are like trying to kind of dance around it because we don't know what's going on. We're trying to figure out the reason why there's a pause. But in the future, that's not going to happen in the LCK, because if there is a pause with, like, okay, someone, like, some Amumu respawned randomly that doesn't make sense because of Hex Flash, like, you guys are going to know about it, like, right away, is kind of the new policy.
That's good. And I will say that even though there have been numerous pauses in LEC and LCS in particular already this year, there haven't been game bug related pauses. In LEC, it was like hardware issues, like hardware firmware issues, I guess, or driver issues. And then in LCS, it was their audio setup that I guess went boom earlier this week and caused an hour-long delay. So I haven't seen any game bugs, which is nice, because game bugs were the overwhelming cause of LCK pauses last year.
Yeah, the rune bug in particular was especially annoying, and created a lot of game delays. I think there's a new system in place even for that, to verify that the players have picked the correct runes every time before we go into game. So LCK is really, like, aware that people were very upset about that last year, and are really trying to make sure that the pauses are handled better. Anyway, that's kind of that drama out of the way. I just wanted to address it here because I think a lot of people are really interested in it and upset about it right now, as they should be. And that's kind of my take and my, like, LCK perspective on the issue.
Very good. Well, I'm glad to hear you'll be able to share those issues, because I think that was part of the frustration that fans had last year, was just these interminable delays with no explanation, no idea when it might end, right? So it's nice that that's not going to be a big deal in the future. But yeah, we should start talking about the actual matches from this week. So the week of upsets, I think that's what you were in the middle of saying.
Yes.
Yeah, and it is a little bit funny, because obviously after the Dplus versus T1 mega banger, excellent series that we saw last week, it did look like these guys were a cut above, and your optimism about Hanwha Life was very well placed, I have to say. I did enjoy how excited you got when Hanwha Life ended their series against T1. It was funny to go back and watch that series and see how thrilled you were, because you kind of called it in terms of them bouncing back.
Yeah, well, I was excited mostly because they found their identity. And
Yeah.
that's what I kept saying, right, is that Hanwha didn't really know what they were trying to do. And I know it's something you've talked about on your stream a lot, is like, what is Hanwha's kind of game plan? What are they trying to do? And it's always revolved around Zeka being, if he's allowed to, playing these assassins or melee champions in mid, and then trying to be a front line or be a flank angle for Viper to pop off. And then Kingen either was told or realized suddenly, like, hey, if I just play tanks in the top lane, then
It's
we
almost
have,
like he went back to Kingen from last year.
yeah.
Weird.
Because if Kingen plays a tank and he can be the front line, and then you have a cross angle with Zeka on a cast-in or an Akali, then you can both threaten the enemy side laner, make sure they can't flank you, so that way Viper is kind of protected in that way, and you can have just some assassination potential there with Zeka. You also have Kingen who could just kind of walk at people to make sure Viper has space. I think it's a good game plan because it plays into Viper's strengths. Like, this is the first game plan that Hanwha has really had that plays into, hey, Viper has a front line. He can play these short range AD carries like Lucian and like the Draven and pop off in a team fight because he's extremely skilled. And if we're just putting Kingen on kind of a variety of mishmash meta champions, he's just not able to make that space for Viper. But you put him on a tank, it feels really different.
Yeah, and particularly it was the last two games that we're referring to versus T1 where he played Ornn. And for those of you who don't remember, Kingen was one of the best Ornn players in the world last spring when everybody was hyped about his like flash Ornn engages. And this is when we saw DRX really go on a tear in spring when Def was playing Kalista all the time. They got a nice big win streak going on. And it took a while for teams to kind of figure this out. But DRX won a lot of games with like Kalista and Ornn last year, and it was a pretty core part of their identity. And Kingen is very good at Ornn, like really good at Ornn.
Yeah.
And it was fun to see him do that again, especially against a team that, you know, when he's playing into the Draven, Ornn is like Draven doesn't do anything to Ornn. Right? You know, if you don't get that massive lead and you get to the late game, this was a 37-minute long game, and Kingen didn't die the entire game. It was pretty much just complete domination from Hanwha Life, and they played a very slow, measured game where the goal was, all right, we're just going to wait until the late game. Don't give T1 any opportunities, and we will group up and have a very strong front-to-back 5v5. And sometimes you just need to revert to that as a team. If your coordination isn't working, just go back to front to back 5v5 tank top scaling. It's the
And
bread
that's what
and
I mean.
butter of League of Legends.
Yeah, and the thing is, you have Kingen and Zeka who have that, you know, that pre-existing synergy, right? And you don't have Def, but you have Viper, and Viper's going to be like, if you're having a conversation with the team, like talking to Clid, like, Clid, you cool with this? If we're trying to play like this, Clid's going to be like, yeah, sure, I can play around that. I can play at least, it's fine. And Viper's going to be like, hell yeah, give me a front line. Like, this is going to be great. Like, I'm going to do a lot because I've been dying a lot. I've been struggling to do damage in team fights. Just from the eye test, it seemed like in the last few games for Hanwha, the last few weeks of their play, it's not like Viper played badly. He had some of the lowest DPM after week 1 in his stats of all 80 carries. Not because he was dying a lot, but because he was trying not to die and therefore unable to actually do damage when the team's identity was, it's Zeka or bust. Is Zeka fed? We win. Is he not? Uh-oh, this is a problem. Zeka can't just assassinate people on the backline. Now you have like a more measured drafting style that gives you more win conditions. And the way they play the Scion as well was really nice to see, where they're lane swapping him into bottom and trying to get Viper plate money on the bottom turret and just being super aggressive, using Scion to set up dives from a long distance away. I thought that was, it's not the first time we've seen stuff like this, but I thought it was pretty creative, and it is bringing back an old style of Scion play that we've seen in the past. And it means that Hanwha Life, their coaching staff, is really thinking about a lot of different angles and avenues of attack to get money to Viper and then play around his gold lead. And I think that creativity is something that is kind of lost on some of our other teams right now, who are super focused on trying to find the best new support to get their AD carry ahead. Whereas Hanwha Life, like, no, we could just play Scion, unkillable in top, and then come bottom side and drop some. We could lose some minions top. We can let the enemy top laner push. We'll just send him bottom and set up a dive that way because Scion doesn't need money. AD carry needs money. Let's put the money bottom.
Yeah, and also I think what probably went under the radar a little bit was that Clid was playing much better. And it's not that Clid was making a bunch of flashy plays, but he was playing super defensively and covering his bot lane so they didn't get dove. For example, when they were playing Lucian Yuumi into Draven Nami, and he was just in the right place at the right time on the map. And maybe Hanwha Life style is a more defensive style where Klid is preventing dives and he's in the right place to kind of hold up some lanes that might be losing in the laning phase in order to activate a 5 versus 5 team fighting team. And
Yeah.
it's not the most exciting way to play jungle, but if that's his job on this roster, he was doing it really well.
He really has, I think, figured out where he needs to be a lot better this week with the style of drafting for Hanwha. I think in the past he looked weak because he looked kind of lost in terms of where he's supposed to be on the map. And when he was playing Sejuani, for example, which is his worst champion this season, it's a champion that doesn't have a lot of agency in a lot of matchups. Like Wukong can bully you, Elise can bully you. So it seemed like a lot of the time on Sejuani, he was like, I can't make an impact in these lanes. I'm not sure what I should be doing. I'm just going to try to farm instead. And then because when you're in the early game as Sejuani versus an Elise or versus a Wukong, like you can get abused. Klid was like, well, maybe I just won't take that 1v1. But guess what? The jungler comes and finds you anyways. If you're not going to shadow your laners, they're going to come find you. They're going to punish you. That famous death he had on Sejuani against the Wukong is the one that really stands out, where he's just a little bit lost in terms of where his pathing should be. And clearly the coaching staff is also honed in on focusing where he should be, or he's come to the realization. Either way, I think it's a win for Hanwha Life here because he's playing better. He looks like he's much more composed. I'm also happy that in that T1 series that we're talking about, that finally a team was willing to actually take the Lucian Yuumi. I've been yelling about this in draft. Every time someone first picks a Nami, I'm like, this is punishable. Like, this can be beaten. And yes, the Nami Draven is not terrible, but it's not definitely not as good as Lucian Nami. That's the specific duo you want right now. And if you really want to do this, you should just pick Lucian first and not Nami, because it's much more difficult to pick the Nami away, in my opinion.
We've seen more of the Lucian or the Draven Nami around the world, and it functions in many ways similarly because of the auto attack empowering that you get from the Nami to the Lucian in the laning phase. So I get it as a backup plan, especially when Gumayushi can play the Draven. I think it can still be strong in lane, and Lucian Yuumi, you're more or less splitting the difference, but you just don't have the same laning ability, and you are going to get pushed in. But if you know that, and you can take it away, and you have an Akali on the roster that does very well with Yuumi in the late game, right? You're kind of hedging your bet in a way. And Klid did a very good job of countering any kind of dives that could have occurred. Like I still think it's a really big danger when you're playing into Draven Nami Vi that you're going to get dove. But credit to Klid that he didn't allow that to happen in the game. So
yeah, if you can survive. If you can survive until 6, you get that Yuumi ultimate, then you have a lot of defensive options, right? Like,
yep.
Yuumi Lucian is really strong, but it isn't strong early the same way that
Yep.
Nami Lucian is. And like to your point, like Draven works really well with Nami because of those empowered autos and how much damage Draven does early. Doesn't work as well as the Lucian because of the Lucian's passive just makes the combo broken.
Yep.
And anyone who's ever played with a Nami like on them as Lucian knows you just feel like it's not even fair. You just walk at them and you press QW and then you E and you dash on them and you kill them. Or they go down to half health and they're like, oh, I'll chug a pot, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna do it again. It's a really it's a fun lane to play if you've never tried it. But I like that they were willing to play this and be like, all right, we have the Yuumi, we have this defensive setup. We're not going to give you the Lucian. And Guma's Draven, by the way, probably the best Draven in the LCK. Like in terms of history, it was his debut pick when he played in the World Cup the World's qualifiers many years back. Like he's very well versed on the champion, still couldn't make it work in that draft with the Nami. So I'm not saying that says a lot about him. I just think it says a lot about how Klid was able to protect that lane. And I'd say Viper is coming up as a close second right now in terms of Draven play in the LCK. I would still give the edge to Guma right now.
I mean, his Viper's Draven play in an LPL last year was phenomenal. I think that was certainly one of his strengths, and I think that his Draven play, I know Dom at least tipped Viper over Ruler as best ADC heading into Worlds, simply because Draven was a pickable champion, and we all know Ruler just didn't play Draven, like has never been a Draven player in his career, so Viper had that kind of extra tool in his toolbox. And I think that was a strong advantage for Viper. Didn't end up working out that way. Neither of them did great at Worlds by our standards, but Viper has been a known Draven player, and it was fun to see him pull it out in this series as well. Overall, though, I don't read too much into this T1 loss. Like, you have to consider, like, what was, this was a kind of a trap game in a way. Faker and Bengi came out afterwards saying that they tried some risky picks and then also didn't prepare as much for this series, which it certainly looked like watching it. You don't want to make too many excuses for T1 losing. And also Hanwha was clearly much better than we expected, and they played pretty well in their own right. So you don't want to take that development away, but I think if this is a playoff series, T1 looks really different.
Yeah, I agree. I think in game 3 they got a little bit caught up in the how creative can we be with this draft situation and prioritize solo lanes, and then like that game was when that was the first time I thought T1's drafting style of like, oh, we can draft solo lanes. Like they put Faker on the Yone and they were like, oh yeah, we're gonna have this answer to cast, and then all of the 80 carries in the world were banned and all of the like cool support picks were banned. Like in that game, I'm looking back at it right now. 4 of the bans were 80 carry bans. You had the Caitlyn, Ashe, and then you had the Kalista, Samira. And then at this point, with the Draven lane already set up, Varus is also banned.
They also banned T1 themselves banned Lucian Varus. So there were 6 ADC bans.
So essentially T1, like when that draft happened, I was watching and I think I was on the desk with Atlas that day, and we were kind of like looking at going, what can they do now? Like this seems really doomed. And then you just saw Guma like scroll through every 80 carry that's not meta. He's like, is it Aphelios? He's like, shit. he's like over on the Jinx, he's like, And then they have the 5th pick for Keria, and Keria's like, am I playing Twitch here? This seems bad. This seems not good. And then he picked Soraka, which I think Soraka, by the way, was the best pick they could have gone with to try to stave off that Heimerdinger Draven pressure. It just wasn't going to work. And I had this weird feeling when we went into the game itself. I was like, I don't think Faker's ever played Yone before, which is weird because it's been a very strong champion for a long time, but it's always been Zeus.
Because we associate it with T1, but yeah, that's what I said too. It's like I do associate Yone with T1 very strongly, but I was like, I guess it was always Zeus that is.
And then yeah, so the graphic comes up and it's like it's Faker's like 74th or 76th champion he's played in the LCK, some crazy number, right? And I was like, yeah, it really is his first time. And it did kind of honestly feel like it was his first time. He didn't have a great game on the champion. I think not his fault. I think the whole team knows, man, this comp isn't it. This is not meta. This is not strong. We're not going to be able to punish the Castan with this. They have a really strong front line with the Sion pick. They pushed bottom side. They got Viper ahead. Like, I think T1, I don't want to say they gave up, but they looked a little bit defeated in that draft because things went very wrong for them. And it was very clear, like, the Jinx and the Soraka was like, ooh, we lost this draft. Like, what can we do? How can we salvage this? And then Faker didn't have the best game of Yone ever. First professional game on it. We'll give him some slack because it's usually Zeus who plays it. But yeah, it did end up feeling like not a game you should read too much into for T1. But on the opposite side, I think a game to celebrate for Hanwha Life. So that's part of why I walked out of that series so hyped, because I know T1 is super good and they have so many more picks that haven't even shown us yet. They're mechanically still, in my opinion, probably the best team in the LCK right now. They have that pre-existing synergy in that Hanwha can creatively draft and make T1's draft look weak and then defeat them in a series like this. For me, it was just so exciting because I'm like, okay, so now we have in the standings, like 7th place team challenging our best team. This means the LCK is exciting and the teams are actually thinking very smart and proactively about their drafts. Because in the past, as you know, as you've cast LCK at 2 for many years, you've watched LCK after leaving. Usually the LCK's adaptability time is very long. It doesn't happen very quickly, but I think already here in week 3, we're seeing Hanwha Life change it up and find success.
Yeah. And they followed it up with a win later on in the week over DRX as well, and it followed much of the same game plan. So I appreciate that they seem to be finding that identity that works for them and have gotten a couple of important wins because they needed this moment to work for them, I think, and the win over T1 will propel them probably down a road towards solidifying a specific style that we've seen. And hopefully that is something that they can work with. I mean, it's great that Kingen overperformed at Worlds, but I would rather see this really solid Kingen tank player that worked so effectively last spring on DRX rather than have him kind of be all over the place and them thinking they have so many different carry threats when they have this wonderful player in Viper that they can just play through in the bot side.
I'll talk about it for just like 2 seconds, but I also thought that that DRX series was pretty cool because DRX prepared well and had their Cho'Gath counter prepared for the Scion as well, and they're like, yeah, we have actually the ability to just know that this is probably how you're going to play your match this week. We've prepared this Cho'Gath pick for Rascal. He played it really well, and then they were able to defeat Hanwha in that game. And there's like layers on layers right now of teams preparing for each other's specific playstyles. And Hanwha definitely a stronger team than DRX right now, but DRX still made that series competitive. I think this is, for a lot of people, I saw a lot of comments being like, well, I don't know. I mean, Hanwha beat T1, but almost lost to DRX. What does it mean? I'm like, well, actually, I think DRX played very well and prepared very well for the series. That's actually what it means. But yeah, it was a really exciting week of LCK because of all of the prep that went into it and all of these really cool upsets. And I guess we'll talk about this just very briefly. The T1 series against Nongshim, because we're talking about where T1 stand right now. As much as we don't want to read anything into the Hanwha Life series, or not too much into the Hanwha Life series for T1, I don't want to read anything into the Nongshim series for T1. It was very fun. It was very weird, and the Nongshim players are very happy that they took a game off of T1, and then of course immediately got completely destroyed in Game 3, and the series was over. But Keria's Twitch support was not inspiring. It was better than Barrel's, but it was not inspiring.
I think he was like level. I think he was like level 9 at 30 minutes into the game when I was watching, because he was just roaming the map, doing absolutely nothing, appearing on a flank, and then getting immediately CC'd and exploded. And I don't even understand. Like, if you're gonna do this and you're gonna play it with Ezreal, why doesn't Gumayushi have TP? Why doesn't he have TP in this game? Like, at least just play under the turret and farm while the Twitch goes elsewhere on the map. But you don't even really have a gankable lane. Like, do you think you're gonna Twitch gank a LeBlanc in mid? Like, is that happening? So I guess he's gonna go top, right? But then Zeus fucked up by blowing his flash early in the top side, so he couldn't play forward, and like he really couldn't skirmish, and then they were just losing skirmishes in the top side. So the whole thing was just a disaster. In fact, I'm impressed T1 stayed in this game for as long as they did, because they should have just been completely wrecked.
I think that's a testament to how good T1 is mechanically, that even with these broken drafts, the skill gap between T1 and Nongshim is so high that they can keep it competitive. And there were problems for Nongshim. I believe that's the game also where like Faker kills Fiesta in the mid lane, and like Fiesta flashes the comet and still dies. And it's one of those games where you're like,
he died to
man,
Scorch,
it's good to,
yeah.
It's one of those games where you're like, man, it's good to be a Nongshim fan. Like the two Nongshim fans that exist are like high-fiving each other through the internet. Like, yes, this was sick. Remember that time when Fiesta died, but we still won? And I thought Peter had a great game on the Karma.
Peter played really well as Karma, yeah.
He was chasing Keria down. He was flashing for roots, and we had a joke segment. Is it Vital or is it Varus? Because on the desk afterwards, because obviously Gumayushi had a bit of a stinker, and Varus can be very strong against Ezreal, even if you arcane. Like, there were many moments where he arcane shifts the arrow and then still dies because the arrow continues to go forward.
Although Vital also had very good flash cues. Like he had a couple moments where I thought he did really well in that. So I think both Peter and Vital did have a good game. Not to take too much away from Nongshim, but yeah, I mean, the Twitch was just completely useless. It also just doesn't follow the same theory that Keria has been playing. You know, the theory of the AD Keria support is, let's take Hail of Blades and aggressively push a lane, right?
Yeah.
Do some good trades in the early game, and then let's build lethality. The problem with this is, when you're playing with the Ezreal, it's like, did he do the same level 1? Yeah, I mean, he hides, he pops out, he uses Ignite, he trades with Hail of Blades, right? So that part's the same, where you try and force that engagement at level 1 and get an advantage. But then it's all about being other spots on the map as the Twitch. And also you're building AP, like he builds Nashor's Tooth. And so it's not really the same play style beyond the level 1.
Yeah.
And it's not really the same strategic theory beyond the level 1.
It's
so
also tough
I was not
to
a
leave.
fan.
it's tough to leave an Ezreal. Like Ezreal's not a great self-sufficient AD carry by
Oh,
himself.
not without teleport. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's like if you can just hide under tower and dodge dives with arcane shift, and if you get hurt, immediately TP back in. But when you're trying to use the heal to get a level 1 advantage, then you either have to continue pressing it with the Twitch, and if the Twitch goes away, then what the fuck was the point of taking the heal? So it wasn't great.
Yeah, maybe a little bit too much cooking on this one, but I'd say for me this week of T1, I think a lot of people are down on T1 in terms of where they sit in the rankings, but I actually still personally think they're the best team in the LCK at this moment in time.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I wanted to address them first because there's like this weird week of T1 where lose to Hanwha barely, you could argue. It was a close series. It wasn't like they got stomped by Hanwha. I think Hanwha surprised them a lot in that third game. They did kind of get caught with their pants down in that draft. But in the Nongshim series, some disrespectful drafting also plagues them. However, in a real series, do they play like that? I don't think so. Are they the better team than Nongshim? Were they the better team in Nongshim even in that game they lost? Yes. Like this is a team that still has that pre-existing synergy. And some of the comms you could see from T1, like that have been released, in some of our like open mic stuff that we do. I mean, they are so good in comms. It's insane. The way they call how they're going to use Callista to take down a dragon, for example, where they literally say, all right, the owner's like, I'm going to smite at 1500s and like, let's time it for 1500 rend and smite. Like during a team fight where they're being harassed and like all this crazy stuff is happening in the fight and they're trying to close the gap, they're just calmly like, go for 1500 in 3, 2, 1, and then they just delete the Drake and win the fight. Like they're so clean on comms. They're so organized with how they play the game. I think this team is going to win this season, and this week is like a weird blemish that no one will remember even next week. Like no one will even remember that this happened. So don't overreact. That's my take on T1 this week.
It's an easy week for T1 next week too. I mean, they basically have 3 remaining matches in the first round robin. They've already played all of the hard teams, right, and beaten them. Their only losses against Hanwha, and the only hard game they have left is Liiv Sandbox. Next week they play BRION and DRX, and then Liiv Sandbox, and then that's their first round robin. So by all rights, this team should be 8-1 after the first round robin, which is, and the series they lost, they at least won a game in.
Yeah. Let's talk about Gen.G and Dplus because these are the other 2 teams in our big 3 in the LCK, and they played against each other this week.
It wasn't even close.
It was not
wasn't
even close.
Even close.
It was not a competitive series.
I really liked what we saw from Gen.G in this series, because it obviously was very reminiscent of Gen.G last year and the way they were playing. And they ran some compositions that were really good at kind of front to back team fighting in the first one, and then creating picks in the second one. And these comps were executed very differently, but they had a really crushingly dominant series. And Pays is coming along amazingly as a rookie player. Like he dies randomly on the map sometimes, but when it comes to his laning and his team fighting, this guy looks just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, the guy is really good. I thought that this series was going into the series before it happened. We had seen some like warning signs of some of the Dplus KIA like macro, and some of their drafting was a little bit like exposed when Def wasn't allowed to play Lucian anymore. But I thought that, I thought that they were going to win the series. Like I thought it's pretty clear they're the favorites. And when we did our predictions for the week, on the English side, not one person predicted Gen.G to win this. Everyone was like, okay, Dplus is still a stronger team. And surprisingly to me, because usually there's a little bit of variance and differing opinions, also not one person on the Korean side predicted Gen.G to win this series. So unanimously across all analysts in the LCK and play-by-plays, unanimously not one person individually actually expected Gen.G to win this series. And looking back on it, maybe we should have had a different take. Maybe there should have been more warning signs here. But I thought good drafting from Gen.G. Some suspect stuff from Showmaker in this one. He played the Swain. And Swain, right now, I think can be very strong, especially with some, like if he's not going into team fights behind and you have certain drafts that work really well with his slows and the damage he can output, can be quite nice. But he was caught in sides. Gen.G knew exactly what they wanted to do with this draft, shut down the Swain, make sure Showmaker's not the threat. And then Doran also on Cassante played a great series. Doran, very inconsistent as always. Like, it's funny with these two teams. You got Doran and Kana. You just don't know what you're going to get. Is it going to be good Kana? Is it going to be good Doran? Is it going to be bad Kana? Is it going to be bad Doran? You just don't know what you're going into. Very emotional players. And Doran showed up. He played really well, especially that Cassante game. And he was team fighting like a madman. That first Rift Herald fight, maybe a little bit too hard, but he played super well. And, you know, I think he's starting to finally get a good read on the meta.
Doran's team fighting was extremely good because the thing about Cassante is that he's just not as good as many other top laners right now in pure 5v5s, especially in the late game. And what you have to do is find ways to team fight with Cassante where basically you are just eliminating somebody else. You have to turn it into a skirmish. Like, you need to break it into smaller pieces. And I think what was so impressive is that he realized exactly, especially in the second game, where they were basically running a pick composition with LeBlanc and Vi, that it wasn't going to be feasible for them to take these straight up 5v5s. And so what he did was he was just marking the Gnar and just removing him from team fights before he could ult. And that really made a big difference because it allowed Pays to pop off on the Zerion cleanup. But we haven't seen that many Cassante players use the champion to aggressively ult early and do things like take out threats, like CC threats like Meganars and Wukongs and these like big engage champions. And to me, that is the most valuable aspect of Cassante in late games situations.
Yeah, because mostly we're seeing Cassante in the LCK used as kind of like frontline and then damage, and then he kind of just becomes this bruiser in the middle of a team fight where he's like, all right, I'm getting a little bit low, I'm going to ult, and then I'm going to do a ton of damage and just basically sacrifice myself to actually break through either the enemy front line or try to get onto the back line if they're overextended. Whereas Doran is playing it more like a utility pick where he's doing a lot of damage, but he's also just saying, like, push the threat out, push the threat away. Yeah. And his side laning is really good. Like, he's actually put threats on people in side lanes, and the team is also playing around his Cassante, because a lot of the time Cassante is just, if I'm killing someone, it's because they got into range of my combo under turret, and the turret actually killed them. That's Cassante's thing. He's like, I can kill you with my turret, and that's what he does. But Doran's actually making aggressive plays otherwise on the map too, and the team is rotating up and trying to push him to get kills in sides, and playing around him and trusting him. And I think that Gen.G trusting Doran is not something that they've always done while he's been on this roster, and in this case they really did. So I feel very good about Gen.G this week and their games. They had that series against Liiv Sandbox as well, where there was some, I would say, disrespectful drafting by Gen.G. They still looked very good, but having the kind of awkward giving closer Silas and giving over Ashe, for example, in that first game was.
They were asking for it.
Probably don't do that. Probably don't do that.
I mean, the trade, I think it was the Maokai that they picked first, and the trade of giving over both Varus and Ashe for that Maokai was just totally not worth. And yeah, it was kind of a disaster. But I think the other part of that series is that, you know, they bounced back really well, and they played, you know, a Sivir Ashe lane, which is not something that we've seen super common, but it really is a pick composition where you just rely on Sivir speed and Ashe arrow to, you know, get something done really quickly, especially with the Vi, kill somebody instantly and never really opt into, you know, a dangerous 5v5. And they executed that comp super well. Yeah,
it was really interesting too, because that was the other time we've seen support Kalista. It was played by Kyle in that game, and he had some cool moments, and he looked really well versed on the pick. But ultimately, it didn't matter in the end. And
I mean, I'm also just laughing because Envy was just suiciding with Kalista ult into the enemy team repeatedly. So it looked like he didn't know how to play that. We should talk a little bit about Liiv Sandbox, though, because they are a team that we haven't spent a lot of time on, and they are now 4-2 in this league. And a good part of that is because Willer is having a really good season. Like, Willer actually looks like one of the better junglers in the LCK right now. And that's been very interesting, I think, for him to have this really cool resurgence.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Willer was a substitute jungler player for Hanwha Life in 2021, and then helped them get their world spot in 2021 when Hanwha was a sixth-place team. Similar to DRX's kind of random run to get to worlds. Now, they didn't go and win the whole thing like DRX did, but Willer was he kind of appeared around that time in the LCK, and we jokingly called him Chovy's bodyguard because he just played around mid only and played really mechanical junglers, jungle champions, and just constantly tried to get Chovy ahead, and that was the goal. Like Hanwha was like, all right, you got Morgan in the top lane, he's going to be fine, and otherwise we're just going to push for Chovy leads. Chovy's going to have massive leads. Like we would just come in and take a third of somebody's health bar and be like, all right, I've done my job. Now Chovy wins this lane and he gets a massive lead. It was a stronger mid meta. And we didn't really know much else about his playstyle besides that because that's how he played. And that was basically the end of the story. Fast forward to him reappearing here now on this roster, our expectations were really low for this roster. Closer had some good games, right? Birdall was fairly weak on Damwon, and like we thought his potential was there. Like there was a lot of hype around Birdall, and I think that kind of got deflated during his time in Damwon. And Nugri came and was like, is Birdall good? Like we were like, Birdall's so good, and then it's like, is he good? And to be frank, I think he has been the weakest part of this roster by a large margin this season. He looks very emotional. He has died in sides and weird moments under turret. Like you could see it on his player cams when he loses one of these 1v1s where he like grabs his chest suddenly afterwards because he's like, you could tell he's just super stressed out. And that was what the Damwon coaching staff said about him, is like, oh, he's still trying to figure out his stage fright and stuff like that. I think he can be insanely good. And we know in scrims from hearing about his scrims and his solo queue, like the guy is insanely good. But we just haven't seen that consistency yet. He's doing a fine job, but I think he is the weakest part of this roster to me, by far. I think Envy has really improved a lot. And I know you're laughing because I know you're thinking about Envy, but I really think Envy has improved a lot.
So here's the thing. I'm laughing because Envy took such a legendary dumpstering at the hands of Deft in that Dplus versus Liiv Sandbox that I don't know how you. Yeah, I'm impressed that he's been able to overcome that. And I look at the Gen.G series, and Envy played extremely well in game one of that series. And then it was him actually kind of griefing in game two. And the way I look at Envy, it's not that I hate Envy. I just think he's like the Croco of AD carries, where he's going to have a game where he looks phenomenal and he's very mechanically skilled. And if he's ahead, he will do crazy plays to get more ahead. But sometimes he's just going to inexplicably int in like the dumbest ways possible. And you just have to accept that. And I love Croco, okay? I'm a big Croco fan. But last year, that was part of the joy of watching Croco, is like, is he going to tower dive this turret and completely throw the entire game? Or is he just going to create some insane play? And I think for younger and newer players, it's important to learn your limits and to test like that. So I don't hate it, but Envy is really hit or miss as a player, game to game.
Yeah, but I think the hits have been really high.
They have been, yeah.
And he seems to be communicating with the team really well, and I have a high hopes for him. Now that being said, I'm the person who had high hopes for Henna, and until literally like he won a bunch of games on Lucian this season, that never came true. But I think the guy has a lot of potential, and he has Kyle with him, right? And Kyle is super good. He and Closer are the best parts of this roster. I think Willer is really strong too, like you say, and Willer's objective control is crazy. How many steals he's been able to get. I think Liiv Sandbox's drafting is really smart too. They were the first team to really pull out the Aurelia pick mid and say this is viable. The Cassiopeia pick, by the way, that they played in game 3 of this series was a really strong pick, but the execution fell short. And for those of you guys who didn't watch, they picked Cassiopeia to Chovy's Rise and didn't get ahead early. That's fine because Cassiopeia can do a lot later on in the game too. She scales up pretty well, but there was a really huge play where Gen.G decided to dive topside and Closer went up to teleport. And if Cassiopeia gets top and ults everybody in this moment, all of these, like as the rest of Liiv Sandbox is rushing top, then it works out perfectly. Chovy, by the way, is walking topside on Rise. He's halfway up the river. He's basically right in front of the Baron pit. he sees the teleport channeling. He doesn't have vision of closer. He sees a teleport channeling on the turret top side. Instantly realm orbs mid and interrupts closer's teleport. It was an amazing play.
I think
It was
he
an amazing
did.
play.
So it was an incredible play. And also what was amazing was that this was pre 14 minutes. So Chovy wasn't level 11. So he couldn't realm warp top because he was too far away. And he couldn't TP into the dive because it was pre 14 minutes. And I think he did have vision of closer in mid, but that doesn't make the play any less amazing.
Yeah, maybe he did, because looking back on it, because it's been a few days, but looking back on it, he did teleport or realm warp brother to exactly where he was.
Yeah.
But
here's the thing: closer also didn't know where Chovy was on the map. He couldn't see him because Chovy was walking back from base and went into the river. So it's not like closer made a mistake by TPing in vision. He did not. He thought that Chovy was going top, and it was just that Chovy couldn't quite get there. And it was an absolutely amazing play, and that will be on my top 5 plays of the week this week for sure. It was really cool.
It was just such a critical moment, because if Cassiopeia completes the teleport and ults there, maybe they turn the entire fight.
Yeah,
Like, it was
and maybe this series is a 2-0 for Liiv Sandbox. Like, legit, that could have been a huge play for Liiv Sandbox.
Yeah, that was one of the coolest things that
or 2-1
happened
rather,
this week.
excuse me. But yeah. It was definitely like the big turning point of that game, and Chovy made a massive play. It was funny. I was talking to Arnold about that play too, and it was just great. It was truly an amazing play.
I mean, Chovy has such a great game sense. Like, he's always just lauded for his CS numbers and like how much damage he does in team fights, but I think he has such a good read on the game, and part of why he has all those CS numbers and why he lanes so well is he just understands matchups so well and understands intricacies like super well. That was one of the coolest things, like, I think since I've started commentating, like, one of the coolest plays I've ever seen. And like, the observers missed it. I was just like, I saw on the mini map, I was flipping out, because I was like, how could his teleport be interrupted? Like, and then I see the Chovy is on top of him. I'm like, Chovy was in the river. He fucking realm warped on him, dude.
I was reviewing it on my stream, and I was watching the mini map, and because they had on the original play, they had the Fog of War toggled to Liiv Sandbox, so I couldn't see that Rise was doing that. But all I saw on the mini map was like Rise suddenly appear next to Cassiopeia. I just canceled the TV. I was like, holy shit! But it was more impactful because it really showed that that Liiv Sandbox couldn't have known that was going to happen, which made the play even better. And so, yeah, really fun. But I think Liiv Sandbox definitely had a shot to win that game if the TP from Cassiopeia goes through and they can counter dive. But yeah, it was really fun series overall. And Gen.G just continues to look better and better week to week. Like, the dumb pays mistakes happen less and less frequently over time. And the team has all of their same strengths in terms of making sure that they take all of the farm on the map, right?
Yeah.
Which was their primary strength, is just getting more gold than you. Right now, they should still be first in the league. They are in terms of total jungle percentage. They have taken 55.7% of the jungle creeps across all their games. The next one is Dplus KIA at 52.4%. That's over a 3% difference. That's really
massive.
huge. That's really huge. They are also first in total lane minions, not by as much, only 50.6%. Last year, they were up by like 2% over any team in the entire world. And this is what I was trying to impress on people, is that they just get more money than you. They know how to manipulate minion waves better than you to get more of the minions, to deny you those minions. And they just kind of slowly, like a boa constrictor, wrap themselves around you and crush you over time. And it's not the sexiest play style, but it is a very effective play style.
Yeah, they're like the Rift tycoons, man. They run the economy. Like,
that's actually a good analogy. I like that.
They're like, I know where the money on this map is, and I'm gonna make sure I get all of it. Like, it's an economics game for them in a lot of ways. They understand how to get the money.
Gen.G stonks through the roof. But the other thing, just as a story note, by the way, so I didn't realize that like Ryu had lost all that weight. Which, yeah, I mean, he looks really good.
The first time I saw him on stage, like, it came up as Ryu, I was like, is it? He looks good.
I had a hard time like knowing it was him because he had the mask on as well, and the camera shots were really fast. But there was a really touching moment in this series where it was like after the first game, because Ryu and Score used to play together on KT, right? And they were part of that same team and started their careers together, really. And now both of them are coaching, and now this is Ryu's like first split back as a coach. And so as they're walking off the stage, there's this shot from behind where like Score like reaches out and like touches Ryu's back, and like they're like looking at each other. And I was like, oh man, that is such a great moment for me who watched these guys on the same team. And you could still like feel that friendship and the fact that, you know, this was the new stage in their relationship. And it was just really nice. It was a
And
really
it's
great
cool too
moment.
because Score obviously just recently became a coach, right, as well, and
Yep.
returned to the LCK. So they've walked very different paths, and Score stayed as a player in Korea much longer than Ryu, who is
Yeah. Playing
didn't do much as a
internationally.
player. Yeah, he played internationally. He did okay, but nothing to write home about compared to what Score accomplished. But still, they both end up in the same place playing against each other. I do think that's really cool. Um, and talking about the Liiv Sandbox power levels right now, we can talk about Dplus almost losing to Kwangdong. I don't really want to. I guess the one thing we'll talk about is how Kana accidentally picked Ghost in that game, which really warped the matchup he played against the Cassante. He got dunked on and couldn't do anything in team fights. I think that's part of why this series went the way it did. I think without that, it probably is a 2-0, and we move on, and no one would really be talking about that much. I think Kana definitely looked very emotional and frustrated about how that series went. I think Showmaker, given the drafts he had, like where he had the LeBlanc, was kind of muted in that game too and wasn't able to do a lot. I think Dplus KIA's drafting leaves a lot of holes, but beyond that series that was just weird, I want to say I think right now, in terms of my rankings, I would put T1 number one. That's a pretty easy call. You think number two behind Gen.G?
No, I think T1 number one. I think Gen.G number two. I think
Yeah,
you
no,
can't. I think you can't argue Gen.G like D+ over Gen.G after the
no.
clapping that they just gave D+.
No, no. But I was gonna say one deeper. I actually think right
Oh,
now, I think Live
all right,
Sandbox could be 3 and D+ is number 4. Like that's
all
kind of
right.
and then Hanwha is like kind of pushing up towards 5th, and it becomes a little bit more washy down there. But I would say Hanwha is probably
That's
5th.
that's still a hot take because the D+ versus Live Sandbox series was crazy one-sided, and like I said earlier, Deft absolutely put Envy into the grave.
But what
I mean,
happens when Deft can't? What happens when Deft can't play Lucian? Is the questions that D+ Key are still trying to answer. They're still trying to answer.
sure.
And that's why, like, yeah, that series, every time I mention this, like, literally everyone says the same thing you do. When I talk to the other casters about it, I'm like, I think Live Sandbox could be our third best team. Everyone's like, yeah, but remember when they got totally shreked? I'm like, yeah, but that was a long time ago. That was 3 weeks
It
ago
wasn't
now.
in the first week of competition, right?
Yeah. That was 3 weeks ago. That was MV having a terrible game and Deft just dunking on him super hard, and then the game is over and it's just super one-sided. Live Sandbox looked really terrible, and we were like, man, Live Sandbox is the worst team. We overreacted. Then we're like, this team, we've never seen a team get bodied like this. Like we were all like, whoo, we were like writing the obituaries, like this could be a Shanghai Dragons. I don't know. Like it felt that bad. Like we were like, oh my god. And then when we saw them play again, we were like, does that mean D+ Kia is actually way better than we thought? And now I think that we've had a little bit of time to think about it. I think Live Sandbox, they might lose to D+ Kia in a rematch. It's hard to know, but I think they've drafted a little bit more consistently than D+ Kia has, and I think they overall have a better game sense than D+ Kia in the mid to late game. I think D+ Kia's early game with Canyon is amazing, and I don't
Yeah.
think that a lot of teams can compare with that. But closing games out has been a bit of a tough point for them, and trying to figure out drafting has been, it seems like for Showmaker, a little bit weird. He's played so many odd picks that either have looked really cool when he wins with them, or he's just kind of fallen apart on them. Like his LeBlanc has been a little bit inconsistent. His Swain pick that he played against Gen.G, a
I like the
little bit
Swain.
odd.
I like the Swain because it provides you an extreme amount of control with the Sivir around objectives. It's just he was caught in a split push that gave up a Baron, right? But I think that there isn't a very effective way to play it, especially in a Sivir comp.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it can work. but they got outplayed. But I think that there are other picks he could have played in that draft that were safer and could have shaped the draft in a better way. I think Swain is so situational right now, and he hasn't
is,
looked.
but I mean, I think in that comp, I think he had Yuumi as well. It was like Sivir and Yuumi. I think Swain is good in that situation. They just played badly with it.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I also feel like maybe if you didn't play Swain, you would have more win conditions and it wouldn't have been as tough, right? Like, but I think we have a different opinion on this one. I'm just saying I think that Showmaker has played a lot of champions, which is in a lot of ways a sign that they probably will be better later because he has a wide understanding of different champions in this meta he thinks can be good in different situations. And we've said this about Dom1 in the past, now Dplus a lot, that this is a team that usually gets really good reads on the meta because they experiment a lot and actually look really clean when metas get solved, and when you go into international events, sometimes they have a faster read than other teams because of this. So that could come true. We go to the second half of the round robin here for Dplus, and they might end up going back up to top 2. But right now, I just don't feel like, just from the eye test and from what we've seen and from some of the confidence from the players and some of the errors that were made, that I would say that I think Dplus KIA is better than Liiv Sandbox. Like, if I could say they're like, if someone was like, what if you said they're like about the same and we're not sure, I can give you that, but if someone was like, no, they're better than Liiv Sandbox definitively, I'm like, I can't say that. I actually don't think I can say that right now.
Well, we also are going to see that matchup in just a couple of weeks again, and right as the season starts, when the new rosters are kind of settling in and the meta settling in, it can be a very like different scenario, right? So I think the second round robin is where we get a better sense of how good these teams are after they debut with these rosters and get accustomed to each other and accustomed to the meta of the first split. So yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued for sure. I also think we're going to get much more information about Dplus this next week because they play both KT and Hanwha Life on the upswing. There's a possibility that Dplus is actually much worse, right?
Yeah, it's true. This is a crazy week, by the way, for Liiv Sandbox. Like, they will be extremely tested in week 5 because they play against both T1 and Dplus in the same week. Oh, it's going to be them playing that rematch like in the oh, sorry, that's week 5. My bad. I'm skipping a week. That's happening in 2 weeks' time. All right, so yeah. They play DRX and Kwangdong Freaks, which you mentioned as well earlier. I think this is actually the easy week for Liiv Sandbox. The hard week is when we go into week 5. So I was skipping a week ahead. I have both weeks open, just looking at the end of the round robin, and I jumped ahead a week. But yeah, that week 5 for Liiv Sandbox is going to be like the real like hard test where the rematch you mentioned with Dplus happens, and then can they beat T1? That'll be really fun to see.
I mean, it's even crazier for Liiv Sandbox because they play T1 to finish the first round robin and then play Dplus to start the second. And then their second game in the second round robin is T1 again. So they play T1.
Oh my God, yeah, you're right. They played T1 twice back to back.
They played T1 twice in 2 weeks. So that'll be really fun. That'll be really fun.
That's their next matchup, so they just play them twice. This happens when the round robin splits. Usually it's very common for one matchup to happen twice like this. We had it with the Telecom War once, which was really funny. But yeah, this is wild. If they can actually perform really consistently here, we'll learn a lot. And if they don't, I feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but they will be tested really hard. And I think there's so much to learn. Like, they should be able to improve a lot as a team with the schedule they have coming up and how tough it is to actually prepare for these matches and then prepare for the same opponent again. Like, it's going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it. To a T1, Dplus T1, then they get to do Nongshim, which is, it'll chill out for a second.
Is LCK on 13.1B this next week?
Yes, it will be on 13.1B. And challengers should be, from what I'm told, I haven't had the official word from the challengers team yet, but I'm going there literally right after this. I'm getting dressed and getting on my bike and driving downtown to go do that. Should be on it as well. So I'm hoping that we're going to get some good ideas about what's going on with the new IE and Quick Blades and what people are playing, if the meta has changed that much. My feeling right now is in Korea, the itemization is going to change a lot, but the meta will change very slowly over time because teams have had to play this 13.1 for so long, and the bot lane, the push, and all that.
I don't know, man. I bet that Gumayushi is going to be playing some Samira. I bet Gumayushi is going to be pulling out. We already saw a Samira ban against him this last week in when it wasn't on this patch. And the Samira pickup has been rocketing up the solo queue win rates and solo queue priority. Like we've seen a lot more Zaya as well. So I think we're going to see some interesting stuff. I
think it's going to be a slow change over time where people are still looking for really strong bot 2v2 push. I mean, Samira is kind of on that list, right? She can play very well with this, and I think that's part of why she was banned in that last series you were talking about. But in terms of how the game is played, like there's a lot of changes to AD carries. You know, some of the mana stuff I think is going to come big into play. Zaya I think is definitely going to be strong, but Zaya can be played in the similar fashion to what we have been seeing AD carries be used this entire time. I think Ashe is still very strong. I think Maokai is still very strong. So we'll see. I could be wrong, and I'm going to find out in a few hours' time when I cast challengers what the challengers teams have been scrimming and what they're playing, because it's a whole new world. We've been on this patch for so long, it feels like I've been trapped in a time void, and there is no other meta, there are no other patches, there are no other champions, so I'm very excited to see something different. Hopefully it's very different, but I think at least at the beginning it might just be a little bit different. Itemization is going to be totally different, but in terms of what champs we see, we'll have to wait and see.
All right. Well, you have any final topics you want to discuss? I think we covered the big matches this week. Unfortunately, like I said, we're not going to be here for a show next week due to the Super Bowl, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. And at that point in time, we'll be able to discuss the entirety of the first round robin, a couple weeks into this meta and everything like that.
I guess the last thing I'll say is the one defining factor for me for this week. We jokingly call it the week of upsets. There were not that many upsets, but some of the games were closer than they should have been. For example, I think that the LCK has shown that this season it might be the most competitive season we've had in years in terms of if you make one mistake or you have one bad draft, like you might lose to Kwangdong, you might lose to Nongshim. Like these teams are incredibly competitive. We have really young and new players in the LCK who this week I think really showcased what their potential is when given just even a slight draft edge, how powerful they are. Like Peter chasing Keria around the map was vital in that Nongshim T1 game. It was one of those games where you're like, any given day, Nongshim is an LCK team. They have good players, and the depth of the LCK is really high right now. We do have a clear, top 4, I would say, maybe top 5 if Hanwha can consistently push their way into okay, this is our top 5. Like we had a clear top 6 last year going into Worlds qualifiers. But I think that the LCK has, with these teams already being able to take some games off of some of the top teams right now, a great foundation going into second round robin and then into summer season. It's one of those times where, again, I think T1 is the best team. But usually we go, T1 is the best team. Let's talk about who's number 2. Like, let's talk about number 3.
Right.
Or like in the past, Dplus KIA is number 1. Let's talk about who's number 2. Or you're like, I already know it's going to be this team versus this team in the finals. It's going to be T1 versus Gen.G. It's going to be Dom1 versus T1. Like, usually before the season starts, you're like, I can see these rosters. I know what happens. And then it happens that way. And the season kind of feels a little bit less interesting as a result. And then the finals are cool and we see what happens internationally. It feels like this season it's not like that. I can say I think T1 is the best team, but I cannot tell you guys T1 is factually the best team right now. Seems likely, but the fact that we have to have a conversation means that that's fucking great. Like we don't always get to do that, well, and that's kind of my closing thoughts for this week.
Yeah, especially because Gen.G in particular seems to be developing faster than we anticipated, and seems to be slotting into light and pays at a much more rapid and good clip. So I think T1 handled Gen.G in their first outing, but that was literally Gen.G's first game of the season with this new roster, and T1 had a crazy advantage of having the same 5 players come back. They'll be hitting each other as the first game for T1 in the second round robin, and that to me is going to be a much better indication because they will have had time to gel by that point in time, and they will have a much more knowledge of T1's tendencies coming in. So I'm excited. I do think that this should be really competitive, and it is. I am really grateful that the matches shook out the way this last week that they did, because I was afraid this is going to be a very boring season, and now it's much more interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And this is the season where we get double elimination playoffs too.
Yes.
Oh, it's gonna be so good. The best teams will play in the finals. It should be close. I know we're ending week 3, but I'm already kind of like looking at the future and getting really hyped.
Yep, it's gonna be good. Thanks, guys, for watching the show. We will see you in 2 weeks after America Super Bowl. Bye-bye.
Bye.